Hey family, welcome to How Love Works, where we talk about the principles for lasting love. Question: what does love have to do with it? That's the title of the movie that Angela Bassett starred in. I guess you guys remember that story. It was a pretty good story. I thought it was about her name. I think it was Anna Mae Bullock. That's her real name, and she got with Ike Turner, changed her name to Tina Turner. It was really interesting because it was about a woman's situation where she had made some she came up with some delusional ideas as far as I was concerned when I first watched the movie about a belief system that she sort of allowed that belief system to kind of encapsulate how her life would be lived with a man like Ike Turner. And the problem is as you saw the movie, is that she stayed in a relationship with a very, very toxic individual. But as we're going to talk about today, I've often had a confusion about what I've kind of seen in my growing up, especially when I grew up in the city of Detroit, Michigan. I make no bones about that. But what I remember about growing up in that city is I used to see all kinds of relationships, and especially in my own family. But I also saw the same dynamics played out in front of me over and over and over and over again. And I used to see these patterns between men and women. The dynamics were pretty intriguing to me. I couldn't really put a name on it, but I used to notice these patterns over and over and over. And so it was just very devastating when I would see many of the women's relationships, and when I got into the Navy subsequently later on in my life, I started realizing I saw these same patterns with men as well. They would get in and out and in and out of these relationships with these women, and these relationships never worked. It just never worked. And so I want to talk today about these patterns. I call them love patterns, but they're dysfunctional love patterns. And so I'm going to title our discussion today, The Four Love Patterns That Keep Women Single. The four love patterns that keep women single. And I think the reason a lot of women are in the relationships that they're in is because they don't know what they don't know about the way they attach or their own particular dysfunctional love language, if you will. I'll borrow that term. They have a dysfunctional way of getting into relationships with individuals, and they continue to repeat the same pattern over and over and over again. My hope today, brothers as well as sisters, my hope today is that what you will glean from this discussion is that you will perhaps develop some awareness of why your relationships seem to take on the repeated repetition, and you see the same patterns constantly erupting in your relationships. So I'm going to talk about these four patterns, and my hope is that you will recognize these patterns and you will do something about them. I'm going to tell you why most of these patterns develop, but right now I'm going to name the four particular patterns, and then I'm going to go into a little detail on each one of them. Now, the big thing you need to understand about these I call them love relationship patterns or dysfunctional patterns is that what these four major patterns divulge for us is it helps us to understand why you keep picking the same guy. If you're a woman, why you keep picking the same type of guy. I know women always have their types. They really don't understand many times where they get this idea of types. They just kind of like what they like because the way these types make them feel. They don't really do any psychoanalysis, or they never really think about where these types come from, what motivates these types. They just never give it a second thought. They just like what they like. So here's the first one. The first one is called superficial love. Superficial love. That's the first type of love. And that's where we're going to find out where or what love has to do with it. I think before I say or describe what superficial love is all about, which is the first type, I think I need to at least clarify this one thing. Love is not enough for some of you ladies who like to get into relationships thinking that if I can just get this man to fall in love with me, or if I can just fall in love with this man, it's just going to fix all my problems. No, it's not. If you are operating from a dysfunctional pattern of love, which many of you are, because the common denominator with all of your relationships that have failed is you. That's the common denominator. So what we want to try to do is we need to ask the question, why? And so that we can identify what the real issue is. And once we can identify and nail that down, then we can subsequently deal with the issue and put that thing to the side and start to develop the right healthy patterns and then move forward with our lives. Does that make sense? All right, here we go. First one, superficial love or superficial lover, whichever, whatever fits you. All right. What is that? A superficial love is an external love. Okay, these are the people, and these are the patterns that you see. You'll see a person being drawn to a partner or a person or a type that has a certain physical appearance, that has a certain professional status, a certain age. And what a superficial lover does is they prioritize those types of things. The car, the house, the job that person may have, the type of career status that person may have. In many cases, they look at the professional status and they're drawn because they think, among the other things I mentioned, they think that that's going to make them happy, and they see it as an extension of them. And so these kinds of people who operate from a superficial form of love, those types of lovers do not ever work. Those relationships do not ever work. Okay? So, let me ask you a couple of questions relative to this issue. Superficial. Do you ever feel like you are only sexually attracted to a partner who you are bad for or is bad for you? Have you ever found yourself in a relationship with someone who does the same kinds of things your last significant other did that hurt you and bothered you? You see, these are the kinds of things you have to ask yourself when you get into these relationships. Number two, how about the addictive love? The addictive love is being drawn to a person who will not compete or who will not commit or settle down. Did you hear the what I said? He will not commit or settle down. Okay? This person cheats. This person is kind of set on a pedestal by you. It's an addictive kind of love. You see this person as better than you in some way, shape, or form, right? You have this, you're emotionally, you are more committed to the individual and the relationship than they are. That's another characteristic, all right? You work very hard in maintaining the relationship, irrespective of how toxic it is. And you do any and everything without any desire or any thought that this is something that is really not contributing to your life. I have another question. Do your relationships tend to last a certain amount of time? You see, when you're in these types of patterns, one thing you'll notice that your relationships, you ever notice that people are in these patterns, their relationships only last maybe 6 months and then they're out? The person ends the relationship or it just fizzles out. Or it may last 1 year. It never goes over a year. You ever notice that? These are the same patterns over and over and over. That's how you know you're in a love obsessed or obsessive pattern relationship. A love obsessive pattern relationship. That's what you're in. And you're just constantly repeating the same patterns over and over and over and over again. Now, I'm going to get to the reasons. Number 3, the Florence Nightingale love pattern. The Florence Nightingale love pattern. Now, we've already talked about the superficial love pattern. Then we talked about the addictive love pattern. Now we're talking about the Florence Nightingale love pattern. Now, what that is this is when you have the women who want to save the bad boys, or the women who want to save the addictive guys, the guys who are on drugs, or who want to save the depressed guys, or these guys got all this potential and we want to do what we can. We're going to bring this guy to the next level. You want to be almost like Jesus Christ in the sense you want to be his redeemer. You want to provide him salvation through your love. No, it's not going to work. Okay? Those relationships never work. Okay? What you do is you see this stuff, you repeatedly find yourselves with partners who are, in my view, these guys are they're just on life support, and it's just a matter of time before somebody's going to pull the plug. Those relationships are dead. They're going to flatline. There's nothing there. But, you know, we have this complex, if you will, this Florence Nightingale complex. And it's very exciting for people. And that's why they get into it. All right. Number 4, and the last one. This is the martyrdom love pattern. The martyrdom love pattern. Now, that one is really bad because that's when a woman will allow herself to be sacrificed. She will take beatings. She will give up money. She will give up time, all kinds of things. She gets verbally and emotionally abused, physically abused. The list just goes on. Oftentimes, what she will also experience, she'll move in with certain guys and she'll deal with angry individuals and just about any negative thing you can imagine that can be a part of that relationship, that woman is willing to sacrifice. in order to maintain that relationship. It's almost like a codependent relationship. But that's the basic pattern. And women get in those patterns with men and they stay with these relationships. A lot of, often women will get into these relationships, especially as a martyrdom love pattern. What you'll see is that she'll stay in these relationships a long period of time. No commitment. What you see with all of these relationships, that's common. The common denominator is no one ever commits. In the superficial love pattern, which is very common in the African American community, there's no commitment. And the addictive love pattern, no commitment. The Florence Nightingale pattern, no commitment. The martyrdom pattern, no commitment. It's not possible because there is so much dysfunction with these love patterns. So what is the actual cause for many of them? Well, one of them is fear. There's a lot of women that get in these relationships. They're compelled to repeat these patterns over and over and over because of fear, because they're very familiar with these patterns. And once a woman gets into or gets to a relationship that she thinks is going to be real, or it starts to look like it's going to be real, she'll have to become vulnerable, and she may have to bring up who she really is. And many women are very terrified of who they think they are. And so they sabotage the relationship by repeating one of those dysfunctional love patterns. And as a result of that, that's something that keeps the relationship on a superficial level or on one of those dysfunctional levels that they are very familiar with. And they much rather stay there than allow themselves to be real in the relationship. The second is denial. A lot of women, they get into denial, and they even deny they even have some of these patterns because they don't want to have to deal with it. The biggest issue, or the common thread for all four of these causes, is that many women, as well as men, but I like to direct this to women because they're the ones most interested in forming long-term relationships. They do not want to make the commitment to make the changes because they recognize how difficult it will be to make those very same changes. A lot of childhood patterns were established while they were growing up, and so they don't want to deal with that. They want to remain in denial about some of the childhood experiences that they had. The second one is the impulsive way people cope with their issues. Some people are very impulsive and they make snap decisions based upon their emotions, and as a result, they're constantly getting in and out of what I would call relationships that are going from crisis to crisis to crisis to crisis. And after a while, they become, in a sense, obsessed with them. And they're very comfortable with it. And again, they don't want to make the commitments to make the changes. All right. Now, the last one I would say are distorted beliefs. I mentioned that earlier because I talked about Anna Mae Bullock vis-a-vis Tina Turner. If you remember the movie, I know it was a loosely portrayal of her life, but she, in the movie, she had made a belief, or she had came up with a belief that leaving someone would be the worst thing you can do. Doesn't matter. And she came up with that dysfunctional belief system because of what she experienced growing up. And that's one of the reasons why she stayed with Ike Turner, but it was not based in reality. So when she applied that belief system to reality, it was always in conflict because it was not something that was real. And to stay in any kind of relationship where you are being abused, that's just not realistic, is it? But that's what she did. She stayed in it for a number of years. So Those are the primary causes for these love patterns that causes women to remain single, because they keep repeating these patterns. They're very repetitious. So my hope is that you can kind of take a back seat, sit down, think about it. Do you have a superficial love pattern? Do you have addictive love pattern? Do you have a Florence Nightingale love pattern? Do you have a martyrdom love pattern? What type of love pattern do you have? All four are dysfunctional. Are you motivated to operate in those patterns because of fear, because of denial, because of the impulsive way you live, or because of distorted beliefs that you have? Any of these things, you need to really sincerely give it some real thought. My hope is that I've been able to give you some food for thought. Think about these issues, especially if you're already in a relationship right now that's not going anywhere. A lot of times your relationships will not proceed, at least take you to the place you want to go, especially if you're operating in these four dysfunctional love patterns that you have been repeating pretty much most of your dating life. If you want to change that, you're going to have to, first of all, do as I always say. You cannot change what you won't acknowledge. And so you have to acknowledge it. You have to take personal responsibility for the choices that you're making. And then you have to move forward after that. My hope is I've helped you. And the hope is that you'll give it some thought. That's my time. I thank you for yours. God bless you. I'll see you on the other side.